again? Or
No.
today? Or okay.
No, it was funny. Liz was actually on their flight going to Atlanta though, for completely different reasons, but she said they all had yeah, so.
That's so cool.
Right. We are on, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. Today, Liz Lathan here with Team CMO, and I am joined by my colleague, Nicole Ashibodu, and our guest today, Dr. Jess Garza. Welcome to the S'mores Campfire Chat, monthly member conversation. Today, we're talking to performance psychologist, Dr. Jess Garza. So Dr. Jess has a TED Talk that you can Google her and find out all the great things. And that is about your prickly emotions and how to make sure that you don't pick up other people's prickly emotions. And I think that the emotional side of what we're talking about today is going to kind of be part of this conversation. The topic that we wanted to get into today is, I'm calling it imposter CMOs. And that's not so much to say that any of us feel like we're not competent or that we are imposters, but there are those little moments of anxiety that I think we all feel, and then they can escalate and really cause us challenges on the executive path. So Dr. Jess, I know that you have worked with a number of C-suite executives who've gone through this. Can you give us a little overview of what you do and what you experience with these folks?
Yeah, so my background, just to give a little bit more clarity on that too, I have a PhD in performance psychology and a master's in mental health and another master's in sport and exercise psychology. So I've worked with C-level suites all the way to executives in the military as well, that also experience the same level of phenomenon, on whether that's like doubt in our abilities or questioning what's our capabilities. Sometimes the anxiety that comes in with making decisions or having all the weight about your decision and the impact of what those results look like. And so when I get brought into an organization, what we quickly do is an assessment of where the company is at, what their goals are. And with the C-levels, we're looking individually about what they bring to the table and where they're limiting themselves that they may not even know sometimes on a subconscious level or even in their language of how they speak. So I really focus in on body language and neurolinguistics, so how people talk and the way that they talk and how that impacts the effort and team unity or connection that they have with their product line or customers.
Is it like an evaluation you do of them, or is it?
That's a good question. So I do have an assessment that I do use, but I also like to just be present because I read energy in the room or just watch the dialogue back and forth. So if I'm on a virtual meeting with them, I'm watching how they're interacting with one another or how they're talking to their customer base or even their bottom line employees, or the ones that are underneath their managers, and then down to the frontline employees, and how they are taking in the information and how they're presenting themselves in front of the other workers.
Fascinating. Okay. So tell us a little bit more about what imposter syndrome has kind of evolved to be. It's a relatively new term. I feel like we didn't start hearing it until maybe 5 years ago or less. So what's your interpretation of it?
It's been around for a very long time. Recent years have switched the syndrome part to more of a phenomenon, and that we really just focus on it as a behavioral health phenomenon, which we describe as self-doubt, and more in our intellect or in our skills, our accomplishments, and it happens more often in high-achieving individuals. So ones who have high success, high-achieving people typically will find some level of questioning their abilities where they feel exposed or about to be exposed, and so which can create doubt and anxiousness, depression, apprehension. When we're having to make really big decisions quickly, that hesitation is a symptom of imposter syndrome. And there's really 6 very specific aspects or attributes to the imposter syndrome as well. And when we go through these today, it's not that we're always an imposter, and it's not always that I'm not. I feel like I'm a very confident individual. I have lots of awards and accolades that I've gone through in my life, but I still question sometimes, like, am I enough? Do they want me? Am I capable of doing this at this big of a scale, knowing that all eyes are going to be on me? So when you have so much external reward or consequences, that's when it starts to rise up a little bit more.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And so this was my feeling with a lot of the CMOs and in my experience in CMO was that when I made it to that point and took on the role, I felt like I had the background. To your point, I had the kind of accreditations. I had all the things that I needed to be confident in the role and to perform the job. And I felt like externally, people were celebrating it and like very much, expecting me to be in that role. But then internally within the organization is where I started to feel a lot more of the scrutiny and the, maybe you don't know what you're doing. And it wasn't overt or anything like that, but the conversations definitely, maybe my own anxiety, or that's where the imposter syndrome I felt like came in for me, which was now I'm working extra hard to prove myself when I was doing fine, but I just start that inner monologue, is that it usually goes.
Yeah, so one of the characteristics is perfectionism in itself. And so needing to be the best, someone who is hyper competitive, who has very perfectionistic behaviors, this can create the imposter syndrome as well. So when we talk to people that it's like, I have to do this, I need to do this, if I just did this, so that's how it would show up in our language, we start to hear those perfectionism language, which we will then know that there's a tendency for that individual to then either have some doubt, question, or have some anxiousness to whatever task it is that they're completing. Mm-hmm. Another characteristic to that is also superheroism. So we take this more in an intrinsic aspect where we still feel like we need to be the best and we have to be the hero that has to save everything. And if I can't be the hero, then I just must not be the one that fits within this role, or the organization doesn't need me. So having to feel like you need to be it all and then be the best at it as well, which I've seen a lot in several different organizations where you want to be the hero. And I've seen a lot of C-suite executives that want to be seen as that, to take care of their employees, to do all the things. And when one hiccup happens, emotions go crazy. They lose their sense of where they're at, what they're doing. Are we even moving in the right place with the company? Is the project that we just initiated the right project? And so those are the type of doubts that can create the imposter phenomenon as well. Mm-hmm. And another big one was, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask that then you look at your peers who are even maybe a level below you or another organization, and you see this just insane decision-making power, confidence, and nobody questions them. And they're just like, we're going this way. And you're like, but actually, no, I know not to go that way, but they're doing, everybody follows them. And so then you get kind of the self-fulfilling prophecy of more imposterness, more, it's just not right for me.
And I think that goes to two other characteristics of it, which talks about the fear of failure. So if I speak up and I'm wrong, then that now comes back at me, and that just refilled the cycle, because there is a cycle of imposter phenomenon or syndrome, if you will, that if I have experienced it once in a different position in another organization, no matter what tier of level I was at, that sticks and harbors more on a somatic, like physical level in your body, where that anxiousness is coming from a past experience. It's coming from a past time where you've had doubt, and that fear of failure is really emphasizing it. And then the other component to that is the denial of competency and or capability. So if I know that I'm capable in certain areas, but then in this one I'm not as familiar with, I'm going to doubt my capability and I'm going to doubt my level of competence because I'm not as familiar. And so oftentimes in the brain in itself, the reason why we have like mental blocks or fear of failure is because of lack of familiarity, which causes our alert brain to start to spike and say like, hold up, what if? And we start to create every what if scenario possible. Like, what if this doesn't go well? What if I fail? What if I blank? What if I ruin this relationship? What if the company, has some really bad quarters and our ROI isn't as high? We can play the what if game all day. That now starts to create the alert system that like, maybe you're not doing as well as you thought. Maybe you're not as strong or capable in this regard.
Yeah. And I feel like with the chief marketing officer role ever expanding now, you have to be, you have to know branding and demand generation and digital marketing and event marketing and like, and all of these things get added on. And most us, when we come up through the ranks, maybe weren't fully broad to know like we didn't go to the full department, maybe 3 of the 17 things you need to know to be successful. And so I think coming in there, where is that level of confidence versus competence, and what do you get trained on versus what do you, like, how do you manage that? How do you find your confidence?
That's a really good question. I think that goes from an internal aspect of knowing capability. And so when I'm denying my worth and I'm denying what I'm capable of, that's where we start to slip. And so I've noticed that a lot more in the organizations that I've been brought on to examine and to help with even just, team engagement, if anything, and then how to sell the products in itself, because a lot of CMOs, it is about relationships. More than anything else, how you're connecting with the product, how you're connecting with the customer, how you're connecting with stakeholders, all of it. And really it kind of boils down to more of an emotional intelligence level, like on an empathic level, how I'm connecting from an emotional standpoint, and then how I'm cognitively perceiving how the consumer is going to receive, or how this is going to be taken with the stakeholders. And so how you develop it is really understanding from an emotional intelligence aspect, the relationship dynamic, the social aspect to that. So social relationships, empathy, and empathy comes with 3 different levels of empathy, like knowing what's happening, feeling what's happening for the other person. And then it's called empathic concern, where I know what to do, or the next steps to take to be able to wrap it all together to have a good delivery, whether that is in the data sheets or with whatever event that they're hosting at that point. So I do agree that, especially for CMOs, the line where this gets broken down a little bit more is within the confidence and competence level. And you have, even on the confidence, what would you take it, like on a scale or a continuum, you have unconscious competence all the way to conscious competence. And there is a breadth that goes all the way through it. And so when you're talking about learning new skills or a new position, you have a new CMO that comes in, talk about imposter syndrome there, because you're coming in with some heavy hitters in the industry who know how to work it. And so you have an unconscious competent CMO unintentionally. It's just the nature of the stepping, like the works of getting into the field. And that's with any field, not just CMOs. It's through repetition, it's through validation, it's through internal belief of having more of a growth mindset, that if I do fail and I don't do well, I can try again and I can learn, or getting a mentor to be able to help explain that process a little bit faster. And then I start to hit through the learning curve to get to a place where I have conscious competence, or unconscious competence is what I mean, where I can just execute without having to think. And so then you get to a place where you're like, I'm not an imposter. What are you talking about? Like, I just can get up and go, and that's easy for me. That probably was not the case for most people in their entire career. At one point or another, because we are human beings, have had a point where you've had doubt or anxiousness, or maybe even slightly depressed because it just didn't go well. And now you're having to deal with the mess and the pickup and what that looks like.
Okay, so talk me through, you said there's 6 elements. You touched on a few of them. Are they in an order, or is they just 6 things?
Not necessarily in order. They're just characteristics of it. So we talked about perfectionism being one of them. And we know that perfectionism isn't real. It's something that we strive to be. I think it took me into my 30s to realize that, like, I didn't have to be perfect. And it's hard when you're trained. I was a gymnast growing up, and so you train for perfectionism, even though you're never going to obtain it, for that one moment in time to be perfect every time that you compete. And I think that we do that too with every sale or every potential customer, that we're like, we have to get this one right, and we have to get this one right. And so we train our brains to constantly still maintain this, like, I need this and I have to be the best at that. So perfectionism is one characteristic. The other one that we talked about was that superheroism, where you have to feel like you're taking on everything so that you can be the main point person to show your credibility and your worth within the company, or as a CMO. And so what ends up happening with the superheroism is that people tend to over-prepare for tasks so that they can appear to be more competent or capable in completing them. And so you'll have people that come in with these massive binders and all these, like, data sheets, all the things. And okay, well, that's nice, but what's really the bottom line up front, and what do I need out of all of this? Because I don't need all of it. It's nice to know, but it's not a have to. And so we spend way more time on all of this when it could have been more on the relationship side of the house or some other type of research aspect that you needed within that role. And then the third one that we were talking about was like the fear of failure in itself, and how often this, I don't know if it's necessarily just the fear of failure, but I also like to think of this as the fear of the unknown, because that's what keeps us in what the comfort zone. We often say, just step out of your comfort zone, and it's really not about stepping out of your comfort zone. So if I don't like to make calls and have to initiate contact with people, or if I don't like to talk about money, because there's, even on different teams within the C-level suite, you're gifted in, to talk about finances and negotiations, and other people are really creative in being able to talk about structure and marketing and all of that stuff in itself. There's two totally different brains in those two roles. But what ends up happening is like the fear of the unknown of what's to come or what could happen, the what if piece that I talked about earlier. And so when I want to stay within my comfort zone, I limit my ability that every time I hit to the outside, the sphere of it, my body essentially will almost reject itself to go past it, because it's like, ooh, remember, like there's danger out there. I just don't know what kind. And that's the unknown of like what could be. So that leads into another one of like fear of success. Well, what if outside that comfort zone is really success? But I'm also fearful of that. We often talk a lot about fear of failure, but we don't talk a lot about like, what if I'm actually really more fearful of all the success that I could possibly have? And that's really hindering me more than anything else, causing me to not show up to my full potential or my authentic self, because I'm either used to being behind somebody or somebody else charging it, but I know that I'm actually more capable. And I know that deep down, I just don't know if I'm ready for what's to come with all of that, which could be more pressure, more responsibility, more managing of money, all the things.
Okay.
And then that other one that we talked about too was the competence and capability, the denial of that. So those would be all 5 of those characteristics that lead to the cycle of imposter syndrome, of it just continuation through experiences of similar events.
Okay. So are there specific steps that people take to overcome this, or do you have to go to therapy, or like, how do you get confident?
Yes, therapy is always recommended. I don't care who you are. Everybody needs it. No, there's a lot of different ways that people can overcome this. And generally speaking, it's more understanding your beliefs and the limitations that you've had or that you've grown up with. So if I believe that, I'll give you one that I've struggled with for a long time that I still have to work on every now and then, which has caused me to have imposter syndrome, or phenomenon throughout my career, which was that I am not enough. And I think that has stemmed from experiences where I've been overshadowed by other people or have been in other roles where men have been, and this isn't a disregard to any male out there, but just in my experience, the male leaders that have been in my role have not been a fan of women and voicing concerns or voicing what could be or should be for advice-wise. And so it made me feel like I was not enough to be heard. And so understanding what the undertone or the belief is, and then working through that so that it's not coming up and people can connect with you on a level. Because if I believe that I'm not enough, I'm subconsciously sending that out to the world so that people see me that way. Even though you may not believe that about me, but because I feel that way or believe it inside, I will show up in different realms to be like, maybe she's not the one because she underdelivered here and she didn't do that, even though it wasn't that I underdelivered, maybe it felt that way to other people, something along those lines. So the mindset or establishing beliefs of what your beliefs are and knowing how to overcome them, that I would say you would need to have a mentor or a coach or a counselor that helps walk you through that.
Okay.
The other one is practicing visualization. So we talk a lot about when you're preparing for a pitch or you're preparing for an event, what does that look like? So we talk about priming the brain. What do I want to do and how do I want to be? What do I want to do is more on a physical level. How do I want it to be structured or set up? What do I want? Who do I want to have there with me for support? And then how do I want to show up? How do I want to be mentally and emotionally? So if I'm showing up to an interview or like a talk show like this, if I'm coming onto the show and I'm like, okay, well, I have a lot of good information that I want to share, but mentally and emotionally I'm coming in and I'm like, so the imposter syndrome is about perfectionism, and it's about fear of failure. And, there's ways to overcome it too. You feel awkward, right? Like right now, everyone's like, oh God, can you speak up? Can you keep going?
Yeah.
So like if I showed up that way, that's not how I want to be. I want to be more energetic. I want to be lively. I want to be engaging. And so I have to visualize, or I could visualize how I want to show up on a call and what the energetic tone is that I want to have when I'm presenting or connecting with others. So that's a really big piece. And then that creates the familiarity that I was talking about earlier, that my brain isn't like, oh no, we haven't done this before. Maybe we should rethink what we're doing. I've already rehearsed it in my brain a couple more times. And we do this a lot with athletes too. Like before they get on whatever competition floor that they're on, they're seeing it ahead of time and it's just one more rep. And so when you're talking about a new CMO coming in, that's the reps those are the mental reps that we can put in.
Yeah.
Positive talk is another really big one that's useful. Most people think that it's just like, oh, you can do this. Well, if I don't feel safe or in control, and often for CMOs, it's a place of control. If I don't feel like I'm in control in the situation, my body is going to be hesitant somatically. And so I'm going to have that resistance or hesitation or doubt. This is just human nature. It doesn't mean that you're not confident in that moment or in that experience. That's just when we're having like, oh no, am I doing this right? Can you just tell me that I'm right? And so we lean on peers to do the same thing to make sure that we're on track. And so understanding like how we're talking to ourselves, if it's something about control, two of the phrases that I typically would say is that use words like I choose or I decided or I decide. So it regains back the control. You're taking back power in whatever doubt or hesitation in that experience. So I choose to come in strong. I choose to talk with clarity. I decide to go in with whatever. That would be another really useful.
Like this one is the hardest one because it feels a little like the little girl standing there going, yeah, I can do this. I can do like this self-talk thing. Feels like I'm never going to do that. How do I? so I like the other ones, but yeah, I mean, but maybe do I stand in front of the mirror and say, I can do this?
True. But then I would also, can I challenge you on that one?
Sure.
Okay. So, typically whenever I ask always if I can challenge this, because you never know. Whenever someone's like, no, please don't expose in front of everybody else, because then, whatever. When we talk about self-talk, most people think that it has to be this super fluffy unicorn butterflies, like we're gonna whisk into the air and we're gonna be amazing. And that's not necessarily the case. It's directing your brain to attend to what you want it to do. And so if I tell myself, I choose to walk in with clarity or whatever it is. So it's like if I'm preparing for a meeting,
this is like you're standing your Superman pose and be ready.
Kind of like that, but that one's more to feel like on a somatic level, on a physiological level, to get your state back into a state of balance. This one's more on a cognitive level, saying like your brain is getting directed to this task at this time. So if I'm talking about, I typically don't talk in a meeting. That's not true. But if I were to say I don't typically talk in a meeting and I just like to observe, and I wanted to say something, but I'm hesitant to say something, me to get out of my comfort zone would feel very alarming. So then before I get in, I would say, I'm going to choose to address the situation when it comes up. Like I decided that I'm going to speak up today. So
it's more setting an intention than it is self-talk then.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. But that is what intention is having the directed self-talk, but people classify it as positive self-talk, which is why it gets misconstrued as something completely different. But what it's really doing is just directing the brain to not be highlighted on like, oh crap, we've been here before. Remember when you choked? Remember when you had doubt? Remember when you were hesitant? Remember when that guy didn't respond to you? And then over here, if I'm focusing on this side, it's like, well, this is what I'm going to take back as my own. I'm going to take back power. I'm going to take back my voice, and I'm going to say things when I feel like I need to say them. And even if it costs me blank, because I know that that's the right thing. And so then I don't feel like I'm an imposter. I was within my authentic self of what I believe to be true.
Okay. All right. So if we've made it to our CMO role, we've been in it for years and years. It's just like not even something we're concerned with. We go in there. Now we've got a new team because we're in a new company, and we have team members who are struggling with this. And we want to raise some of them up so that they can take our role and we can move on. How do we help team members actually overcome it?
By role modeling more than anything else.
Okay.
We often expect other people to, so expectations is like the death of everybody. If I expected you to do something without you telling me, I'm going to fail no matter what. And that's going to create more imposter in me because I didn't live up to Liz's expectations, even though I didn't know what they really were. And so when you're in a C-level suite, clarity and expectations is going to be your best friend, because your employees have no freaking idea of what the heck that you are wanting in your incredible brain that has brought you to that level already. Most C-level suites, their brain is just like hardwired to go super, super fast, skip a couple beats, but then they also expect people to know that same level of frequency that they're on, that they are moving so fast and people can't keep up, the ones underneath them. Not that they can't, but most often it's just a different level of hardwired. And so you have to communicate what that looks like. So communication and expectations, I think, would be the biggest thing, that undertone out of everything that would be established first. Then within those expectations, if it's not being met, this is where the line of shame comes in pretty quickly. So expectation words are, you just need to get this done. So the you need to and just piece, those are expectations. So if I don't do that, I can create shame, even though you're like, Jess, you just need to get this done. And I'm like, oh crap, I didn't do it. Now I feel bad. And I'm like, Jess, why didn't you do this? You should have done it. And now that's another one. You should have. Another one is I always mess up, or like the absolute words. So always, never, those words create high expectations or can lead to shame. And so the more often I'm using that type of language with my employees or other team members, I now am telling them, like, how dare you? And I'm not saying that you shouldn't be. There are times for those use of words. And there's other times where if I'm doing it repetitively, all I've done is this. And I've built a level of community in a way that's fostering failure to learn and accelerate that learning.
So that's that moment where you realize you're the one causing the imposter syndrome in your entire staff.
Correct. Absolutely. And that's
what if you,
I've done that to CMOs as well, or not CMOs, to even to owners of companies. And that's not a fun conversation that I've had with them. But it's a reality one that I'm okay being the bad guy of saying, like, this is what's costing a lot of the retention. So this is why you have so much turnover, I should say. And nobody wants to stay because it doesn't feel good being here. And unfortunately, our emotions, yes, as fleeting as they are, it what causes us to stay in a lot of situations. Whether that's the hope that it's going to get better, or this feels really nice and I'm being treated well, now I'm going to give you more effort, more whatever to the company.
So, I mean, and that was going to be my next question is, if I, as a leader, observe that on another member of my leadership team, what steps can I take? Of course, you're in a big company, go to HR, do whatever, but is there a way to bring that up as a peer, to tell somebody, like, I notice you use these phrases and it makes your team all want to quit?
Yeah, I would say first, well, they would hire me, so I'd already be there. No, I'm just kidding. So typically what I would do, I have trained other managers. So I've trained the C-level suite to know what the expectations are, the words, the language are, and then what we do is typically train the next executive level. And then down from there, I have them train the managers and so on and so forth, so that we start to get a common language within the organization. And so when I'm not there, what we'll do is typical like monthly check-ins of what's the tone, what's the language that's being used. And then sometimes even in the conversations with them, when I'm doing reviews, I'll hear it and I'm like, ooh, did you hear yourself say it? And it's really hard because these are things that are so innate that we've heard our whole life. So it doesn't sound bad when we're saying it, but on the subconscious level, it's coming up and it's rewiring our brain to hold strong to these beliefs that, like, I'm never doing anything right. They're never going to see me, or they always see him, and using those absolute words. So I would say more than anything is having awareness, self-awareness, and self-regulation. And so typically when we go in and something's being missed, we're like, where is it? Why isn't this done? I need this now. Rather than asking more exploratory questions that elicit more information that helps them understand what happened, rather than coming in hot with where it's like the director type of mentality.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and that gets a little bit into your TED Talk. So I wouldn't mind if you would share a little bit about the jumping cholla effect and kind of how that affects teams and can affect, I think, imposter syndrome as well.
Oh, absolutely. So my TED Talk is based on empathy and empathic concern and how energy is transferred from one person to the next. And in Arizona, there's this really cool cactus visually, not when you get up close to it. When you get really close to this cactus, what ends up happening is these little pines off of it jump off the cactus and can attach to whatever predator that's nearby. And so these little spikes, when I was hiking in Arizona, had pricked off me and like pricked right into my skin. And I noticed that like when I went to go and pick it off, as soon as you went to lift it, it would break off again and attach to another part of the skin. And so it just kept replicating that same process over and over again. And I was getting more mad by the minute that this thing would not get out of me. You had to be super deliberate on how you were taking these spines out of your body as it was attached. And all of a sudden in that moment, I'm like, holy crap, this is just like emotions, that where we can brush by people or work with people who have, they just woke up on the wrong side of the bed, or they just have a lot going on in the background, whether that's on a personal level or financial level, business level, that when their energy is so, I'm going to say more dark than normal, that it can bounce and attach to you. And if you're not careful, you take it on as your own, just as I was taking on these spines as my own. And if I'm not deliberate in detaching from that emotion or recognizing that that emotion isn't mine, I then harbor it. And the next person I walk by, I'm also now brushing that emotional state to them. And so it just transfers. On a biological level, this happens because we have what we call an open loop system in our brain, where we are hardwired to pick up these nuances in our environment for survival aspects. And so if I walk into a room, and you can feel energy in a room, can't see energy, but you can absolutely feel it. And so I walk by somebody and I'm like, what the heck is wrong with them? Like, not standing by that one. Like, you can just feel that there's tension. When that happens, I'm like, okay, that's not me. And so I end up I will like kind of wave, or I'm like, oh, hi, but I will tell myself like, I'm not attaching to that. So I almost kind of like push their energy back to them on a subconscious and somewhat physical level. So I'm like, oh, hey, good to see you.
Talk to the hand.
Nice to know you. And they won't be up like here sometimes, but even if I walk by, sometimes I'll even like brush my hair over so that I'm detaching from it, where I'm just like, nope, that's theirs today, but they don't know what I'm doing. But that's my way to know, like, okay, this isn't mine, this is theirs. And then I create a space where I can have some empathy, where I'm like, okay, something's going on, rather than getting pissed right next to them because they were reacting to me or responding to me in a way that was unpleasant. And we do that a lot with other people because we feel like, how dare you attack me? Don't do that when I'm walking by. But what ends up happening is that we just don't know what's happening in their world, and people take it offensively. And so if I can create the space, detach from it, send that energy back to them and give it back to them, I don't have to own it. But we often own other people's emotions as our own, and it's not our responsibility to take them on. We do this as a spouse or in a relationship, and we also do it as parents. When kids are hurting, we will often try to take on their pain. It is not our responsibility to do so. It's their responsibility to learn, recognize, and manage their emotions, and you are there to guide them, just like you would an employee or another peer. You are there to guide, to support, and to understand, because more often than not in relationships, you get home and you have big emotions, and your spouse is like, what's going on? You're like, blah, 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 blah. And they're like, okay, well, just do this. You're like, I didn't ask for advice. I didn't want any advice. Just wanted to be heard and understood, and that was it. And most often kids are the same way. Employees are the same way. Your peers are the same way. And so if I can create that space without getting attached to their emotions, then I have more empathy and understanding. And now we're creating emotional intelligence in itself, which goes back to what I was saying earlier about that's really the art of a CMO, is having emotional intelligence, being able to read the room, understand the situation, and then know what to do or to ask clarifying questions to understand and take action.
I guess I should have known about this or thought about it more when my kids were little, and the daycare tells me perfect angels, and then they come home and they are not perfect angels. And I'm like, why are they like this at home, but so different at school? It's holding it in all day long, you know? I feel like that at work.
Yeah, we are absolutely no different. I feel like on an energetic level and being able to process emotions, we haven't necessarily been taught how to do that. We have observed other people on how they do that, and that's the way that we've learned. But I don't think that our society has done an incredible job on explaining really where the emotions are coming from, why they're happening, that the emotions are often flowing. So, I mean, if you think about how often you feel something, it's a lot more than you're just like, you know, I felt really crappy today, or I felt really happy today. Every thought that you have has a biochemical release. And we typically have around 70 to 80,000 thoughts a day. Wild. We probably can count or recall maybe like 5 of them, but every single one of those thoughts has a biochemical release that causes an emotional state. So you can go in a situation and be like, I'm content, and then all of a sudden I'm really excited, and the next moment I'm angry, and then I'm sad and crying. You're like, what the heck happened? And someone's like, well, you're just PMSing. You're like, no, it's not. It's all my thoughts. But yeah, so like you can go through a range of emotions within seconds. And this, I mean, you can easily see this on a highway when someone cuts you off and you're mad, and then all of a sudden like you're really worried and sad, and you're like, this could have hurt us really bad, and now I'm worried, or my heart's racing, whatever the case may be. But if we really pay attention to the amount of what's going on, then I can just say, okay, on a biological level, this is happening. I don't have to attach even to my own emotions. I can watch it go by like a parade. And if I choose to, so that's the cool part, is I get to choose if I'm wanting to stay in that state. So if I'm wanting to be mad, like, cool, I'm going to choose to be mad today, or I'm going to choose to be mad for 5 more minutes. And then I'm going to choose a different emotional state to go after. That first one that typically happens after that raw thought, it's hard to, like, that's a natural response, but I can choose the second emotional state, or I can choose the secondary thought of how I want to perceive the situation. Because that's really what it's coming down to, is selective perception, or having a perception that is effective, which creates back to these past memories of, look, this is happening all over again. And the last time that this happened, I typically respond this way. And so you have already this confirmation bias is what it's called, a previous event confirming how you're viewing certain events.
Okay. So I'm revisiting in my brain when you were talking about expectations earlier, and going back to the CMO feeling anxious about the role. And of course, with all of the challenges that everyone's having with business right now, and budget cuts and layoffs and all of the things, about the role, revisit for me the expectation piece. So how do if I've kind of grown imposter syndrome over the things that have been happening, how do I go reset expectations with my leadership, the people above me, so that I can regain my confidence and know that what I'm doing, I may not know what I'm doing because I have no idea how the market's going to react to campaigns that I'm running or things that I'm doing, but I can have a strategy and I can have a plan, how to be confident in it, and how expectations to have confidence.
That's a loaded question. What I would say to that is there's many different parts, and I'll break it down to one, the conversations that you're having with the stakeholders, what expectations are in the language that you're choosing to have, and then how confidence can be embedded with that within what I call safety and control. So the first one on communicating, if you don't know what your expectations are, then there is a strong lack of communication within role identity and what that role expectation is. And this is what ends up happening when we talked about that superhumorism or heroism within imposter syndrome, is that when we don't have clear expectations, you end up trying to do everything. And then the more that you start to do everything, it now becomes expected from the stakeholders that you do everything. And the moment you go back to your job role and you look at like, well, I only have to do this, this, and this, and you start to only do this, now you look like you're underperforming.
Exactly.
And I have seen this time and time again. And to the point where it's cost a lot of C-level suites their positions, because they're like, no, wait. I'm just setting up boundaries of what you told me that this is my roles and expectations. I have just overexerted myself for years, decades even, and now I'm choosing not to do that. And so then they're like, well, we'll find somebody else that will do that. And they have been replaced a time or two that I've seen. And then there's other ones that are like, you're right. Let's go back and do a strong balance between life and work and what that looks like. And those ones are often because their stakeholders respect and understand and hold empathy and emotional intelligence to their other executives. Other ones who have more high ego or just don't give clarity, they're like, well, then I'll find somebody else that can replace you, and we'll do the same rinse and repeat with them. And it doesn't build good culture, and they often plateau within their company until they can have a hard reset, whatever that looks like. So to your question, one is having strong clarity of what your roles and responsibilities are within your job position, and then knowing what you're willing to either overexert or maintain in a state of balance for your own mental health awareness and being able to rejuvenate with the job, because there is strong burnout in C-level suites that I've worked with that they get so tired, emotionally withdrawn, and they just feel clock in, clock out, even though it's not a clock in, clock out kind of job at that point, at that level. It's around the clock, but you still have to know when the balance give and take is too. To the expectation piece, this goes into when you're talking about like, now I know what my expectations are. When I know what my expectations are, I have to be realistic of what my time is in completion to those expectations. Because if I say I can do all of this stuff, but I didn't give myself enough time or communicate the time length that I need to complete them, I've just created a lack, whether that's time, resources, energy, effort, blank, because it didn't get completed. And so then that can be like, well, look, you can't do everything, so you might not be enough. And now that just reinforced the imposter syndrome all over again. Or maybe I'm not enough for this role, and now I have to hire somebody else. And now they're going to look at like, oh, look, now we have to get 2 people for your one role. Like, you're costing me more money and all these other things. And it's like, well, no, this is actually more efficient. I promise. It just looks like there's more, but it's not. And so now you're having to defend why you need all the extra help because of the demands of that position or the demands of the task. So I'd say time management and realistic measures that you can accomplish will help you with your own expectations. And then being able to monitor competence level and capability. So that's not taking on everything, but directing and delegating where necessary in those roles, because that's actually why you're in that role. Your job is to send out to the right other people to help you build whatever it is that you need to in that position, especially at a C-level position. Your job no longer is to do everything. It's more directing and delegating and making sure efficiency is within the organization. The other part to that is, I would say, how you're setting up your expectations. So if you're using a lot of those expectational words, you're not really getting things done. You've just created shame and hesitation and more doubt over time. So how you're phrasing what you need to do to get done. So even on your to-do list, like how you're writing what those things, the tasks that need to be completed. And when I say from a safety and control piece, I think this is my belief. There's not necessarily scientific data yet, but from the last year of me really researching on a safety and a control piece, when people have doubt, anxiety, worry, fear, failure, pretty much every characteristic that you can think of in the imposter phenomenon, or even just within mental blocks in itself, it comes down to, am I safe? And safety doesn't mean like someone's coming, it can mean someone is threatening me on a physical level, like I might get hurt or injured. Safety can also mean that I might be exposed, what I call character assassination, that if I do something wrong, I might be embarrassed. People might judge me. They might be like, oh, she's a fraud, or whatever the case may be. So I can have character assassination, whether I do that to myself or other people are doing it to me. That's what safety would represent. And then the control piece is that I feel like I'm not in control of my position anymore, or of the task, or of the responsibility, or of the say of what to do, that whoever is around me gets more, voice than I do, even though I know that this is what should be happening. And so if I don't feel like I have control, your self-worth and your self-esteem and your confidence will plummet quickly. So whether it's a safety concern or a control concern, those two, and I can break that down by any belief that you have, it can fit into a category. Is it about control or is it about safety? And once I know which one it's about for the individual, then I can redirect what that expectation looks like and the belief that they have behind themselves so that they can have more motivation, productivity, clarity, conversation, the whole thing. Because your whole demeanor changes because we're rewiring how that brain holds strong to that belief is really what it is. But it always boils down to safety or concern. And generally in more of an executive world, safety is in relation to character assassination, not physically getting hurt.
So I guess I can see the two categories, but I'm not sure that I can identify the difference between the two. So if I am concerned that I've got all the data that I'm going to go present to the board of directors, and the board of directors are going to ask questions that I might not have the answers to immediately, safety or control?
It would depend. So that same example can depend on the person. I can give you two examples of what that would look like on each one. So if I came in with a safety, if my undertone was about safety, I would feel that I'm going to get embarrassed in front of the board of directors if I don't know the question. And so if I'm embarrassed, then they might look at me like, who is this girl and why is she here in presenting this information if she doesn't know the answer? That would be attacking who I am as an individual and what my character is of who I believe to be. If it's about control, maybe I got the data report from a person underneath me who I expected to give me all the data. And then I just went into the room to go and do it. And I didn't feel like I had any control or say over how the data was going to be presented. It just got put up to the screen and I didn't get to control the screen. Somebody else is controlling the screen. And I'm like, no, go back. And then I'm like, okay, now go forward. And then I'm getting flustered because if I could just have the damn remote and control the screen and be able to talk about it, then all of a sudden I'm getting rattled because my external focus goes on to everything else around me, and I don't feel in control of myself or what's going on in the room. Does that make sense?
It does, but I don't know how I would address the difference of them. So now that I've identified which one it is based on whatever is right for me, then what do I do with that?
So being aware of what it feels like, collecting evidence of what it is, and you won't know in the moment until you do reflection afterwards. So if you're like, man, that meeting was horrible or just didn't feel right or something was off, I would go back and be like, well, was it about me not feeling confident in how I presented and I was more worried how I was going to be viewed by everybody? And if it was that, then I would go back to, well, what did I expect? And most people would say, well, I expected it to be better than that. And then I would say, well, what does that look like? And they're like, I don't know, just better than that. I'm like, well, that tells me that there was no clarity and expectation, which now you go back to shaming, like, see, you didn't do it right. It should have been better. Now I just used two of those words that were shame words and expectation words. So I would say, well, we need to have more clarity when you go in. Now this is going back to intention on the positive self-talk of like, well, how did you want to be in the room? What did you want to do in the room? Well, maybe I wanted to present the data, but how, or what does that look like is usually the two phrases that I'd say. And I say it over and over again. Well, what does that look like? Well, presenting it with, these 5 data points. Okay. So what does that look like? And they're like, Jess, stop asking me all these questions. And I'm like, no, I know, but if we can be as specific as possible, then I know I met my intention and my expectation was met by hitting data points. But most people tend to go so big on the outcome of whatever it is that they wanted to accomplish that they forget the process in between. And the process is where we can really direct our attention that will lead to the big outcome, but we often lose focus over here. So then we become worried about how was it presented? Did I do it right? Was I in control? Did it fit? Like all the things.
Okay, I understand. And so now when I'm prepping for the next time there's a board meeting and I've got the data, I know that I'm most concerned about having control but I feel like that's because it makes me feel safer, because if I can control it, then I'm going to feel like I'm not going to embarrass myself, and I'm not going to get fired, and I'm not going to do everything wrong. And so when I go at it with a systematic approach, that I just need to understand and control more so that my safety is like secured.
I'm going to challenge that one. Is that okay?
Okay. Yeah, please. Because I'm still like, I feel like they still go into each other.
They absolutely do. They can. So sometimes you can have, they're like, once they feel super close. I am a more of a controlled person than anything else. So I view the world more through control. So
Okay.
even when I work with clients, I'm like, ooh, but I really think it should be this. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I just did it to you. And I'll even say it to them. I'm like, see, I wanted to control what you were putting down just now. And then I'm like, go ahead, do whatever it is. It's safety for you, but it's not control. And so I have to like, and we don't often realize how we're responding or how we view the world. So some people view it through safety. Like I feel like I need to appear confident and controlled or whatever. And other people view it like, no, if you just did this and you just did this. So some language kind of sounds a difference. But to get back to what you were just saying, I would say that I would work more on how you view yourself or how you think other people view you first over control. Because the way that you just explained it kept going back to safety, but where we can tangibly feel something is in control. So you like to, on a tactile level, feel like you have to have it in your hand to know what it is, rather than on the invisible plane of being like, okay, well, if I have to sit with this emotional, like I'm worried how I look, or is this okay? Then it's you're not as touchy-feely in that sense to talk about emotions. And so I'm going to put this one down because I know what this is, and I know that I can grab it and I can do something with it, and I'll ignore this part of actually feeling a certain way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess I still go back to on the safety side. So if mostly I want to just save face, I don't want to be embarrassed, and I want to make sure that I'm employed when the meeting's over, then I guess it is more about working on yourself and knowing that, and rather than just having to have control.
Yeah.
Is that
well? How often do you talk about emotions?
Say again.
How often do you talk about emotions?
Me? Oh, well, all the time. I'm very emotional.
So when you're in states where like you're making big deals, you're having to present the data, what is one of your initial thoughts or main themes that typically happen when you're walking into those meetings?
Well, I guess I have a little bit of an engineering mind. So as long as I understand everything that went into what is being presented, then I feel comfortable enough to talk confidently about the data. But if I've been given 17 slides by other team members and I'm presenting on their behalf, knowing questions are going to come at me that I have to just improv answers to, then I'm definitely less confident. And even though I must state it with confidence, that's where I would feel the imposter, like, I hope what I said was right,
you're
but
not feeling confident. What does that mean to you?
What does it mean when I'm not feeling confident? That they'll find out that I'm a fraud, that I didn't really do this work.
Okay. So when you first started talking, you used the word, I need to know everything. So there's an absolute word of an expectation that if I don't know everything, then I'm not doing my job. And then, so that's an expectation aspect. Now you went into like, if somebody else did it, then I know questions going to be given to me and I didn't have control over it. But both, like, I need to know everything is about control, and then not having control over the reports in itself. And if both of those didn't happen, it would lead to, I would either feel embarrassed or not confident or fraud, which would result to safety. So the undertone of all of that is, I'm going to look like a fraud in front of everybody. So it can appear like control because that's what has been tangibly placed in front of you, but the undertone to it was about me being a fraud. And so even if I felt confident in not knowing, then I can communicate that where it's like, there's going to be some questions and I can prep that. So this is priming and knowing what to do and visualizing that if I get questions that I don't know, so we call it if and then statements. If this happens, then I do this. So if I get asked questions I don't know, then I'm going to state there's going to be questions that you will probably have that I'm going to have to get back to you. And I can do that by the end of the day or by tomorrow. And I'd be happy to answer those questions as they come up and be very transparent on where we are with this data at this moment. And now I look like I freaking know something, and I'm transparent and clarity, and that I'm still going to find out what we need to find out to get us to move the needle forward. And so that doesn't make me feel like I'm a fraud on my undertone. It was, then I'm going to go back and be like, okay, guys, you need to get control of this situation and find these answers. And this is how we do it.
That's okay. I'm there. I get it. All right. Well, does anyone else on the call have any questions? Because I just got totally like fixed. So if not, yeah, go ahead, Nicole.
No, I'm saying, Tommy, you were shaking your head and all
Yeah,
that.
it's absolutely fascinating. I love the kind of psychology behind how we all work together and how we show up. I think your points around expectations are spot on and just
Yes.
mirror my experiences that, you know, when you believe something should happen, it's an expectation you're putting on yourself or someone else. But just really clearly articulating expectations is really important. One of the things that I have done with my teams that may not be all that of a positive experience is, you know, starting really high level with what we're trying to achieve as the expectation, and then allowing that dialogue of them coming back and kind of inspecting a bit more on the expectations to say, okay, well, what do you mean by this? And what if we did that? Because it kind of allows that exploration. But I think, you know, the thing that I've learned over time is like, if people don't come back from those kind of broad, ambiguous expectations, then it's on me as a leader if they don't deliver what I've asked for. And
absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's the challenging thing, is that I like to get people thinking with big ideas. And especially, you know, as I'm working in kind of more creative disciplines, it's imperative that you don't just shut someone down, but that you inspire them and say, hey, we need to go achieve this. You know, I want you to own how we get there, but still setting some boundaries, right? So finding that balance is always tricky.
I would agree. And I'd say that the two non-threatening phrases when you're asking those questions, because the way that you just phrased, like, I want them to have these really big ideas, and I think that's fantastic and go out and do great things. But I would say, what does that look like? And tell me what that looks like, or tell me more about blank. And so if they have these big ideas, you have them start to tell them about the idea, and then you start to say, what does that look like? And you keep going down until they can narrate specifically what that means from A to B. And then now you both are on the same page on expectations. Because the crazy thing is that I could say, so if I say the word, or maybe, yeah, well, I'll go with this. So if I say house, Liz, what came up in your head?
First, I saw a tiny home, and then I saw a mansion.
Okay, Tommy, what did you see in your head?
Did you say how as in H-O-W?
I saw house. House.
House. I just thought of a TV show.
Oh,
Okay.
wow.
Nicole, what came up in your head?
The house I'm building.
So I said one word, and all three of you had different things, images in your head. One saw the TV show, a tiny home, then your other home, and then one that's being built. So even though we all know on a logical, theoretical level what house means, all of us had a different image in our head and how that was interpreted. So we can even think that we're being very clear in language, and it still doesn't come up the same way. So if I say, well, tell me what that means, or what's that about for you, or what does that mean for you, or what does that look like? Now I'm starting to understand what they're picturing and hearing and seeing in their head, and then what I'm translating back, because I might feel like I'm the best translator in the world, and it still doesn't come across the way that I want. So I'm always like, well, what was that about for you? Or what does that look like? Tell me more about X. And they're non-threatening phrases that disarms the people that you're speaking with and allows them to be able to share and now be like, oh, they value my opinion, or they're ready to hear what I have to say. And then you, on the other hand, are like, no, I'm checking to make sure that we are on the same page. So I appreciate you going into that.
Yeah. Oh, that was great. Well, Dr. Jess, I can't believe it's already been an hour. If people would like to get in touch with you about actually doing a team evaluation or bringing you in to talk to the team, how can they find you?
You can contact me via email, jess@altier.com. And I think Liz is going to send that out too. I also am on LinkedIn under Dr. Jess Garza, and you can reach me out that way. or on Instagram too at Dr. Jess Garza.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today. This was an incredible conversation. We really appreciate it. And thank you everybody else for joining too. The recording of this will be up on the YouTube channel at Team CMO, and we can't wait to see you all next month. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Great job.